What do you do when you don't know who to trust? Experienced Detective James Carter has always been sure of one thing. Betrayals happen when you don't expect them. When young Detective Alex Harrison becomes his new partner, conflict erupts between them that threatens to destroy everything they're working on. Evidence points to cheating, suspicion turns to rage, and now they face a choice. Keep fighting each other, or face the enemy together. But what if all is not as it seems? Get ready for a story where everything can change in an instant, and the only question left is how will it end? Detective James Carter sat at his desk, staring at the latest case files strewn across the surface. His office, cluttered with old reports, coffee cups, and photos from past cases, spoke of years of hard work and determination. The walls were decorated with commendations, framed newspaper clippings, and a few photos of him with his former partners, smiling in better times. The dim, flickering light from a single desk lamp cast shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere of tension and unspoken stories. James had been a part of the organized crime unit for nearly 15 years, and he had seen it all. His graying hair and weathered face told the story of a man who had battled his way through the chaos of the streets. He was a tough African-American cop with a no-nonsense attitude, respected by his colleagues and feared by the criminals who dared cross his path. But those same years of service had also made him a man who trusted few and suspected many. Today was different, though. His partner of 7 years, Mark Daniels, who had been more than just a partner but a close friend, had decided to retire early. The news hit James hard, and he was left with a mix of sadness, frustration, and anxiety. Mark had been his rock, someone who understood him without words. Now, with Mark gone, James knew the department would soon assign him a new partner, someone he didn't know, didn't trust, and, frankly, didn't want. He wasn't one to adapt well to change, especially when it came to trusting new faces. His career had taught him one undeniable truth: trust was earned, not given. As he leaned back in his chair, James took another sip of his lukewarm coffee, his eyes narrowing at the thought of breaking in a new rookie. He muttered under his breath, "Great. Just what I needed. A kid, fresh out of the academy, or some transfer who thinks he knows everything." Just as he was about to toss the rest of the coffee in the trash, a sharp knock came at the door, pulling him out of his brooding thoughts. He looked up to see Captain Rachel Stone, a woman in her early 50s with short-cropped gray hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a stern expression that could rival his own. She walked in without waiting for an invitation, her footsteps quick and purposeful, her face set with a seriousness that suggested she was not in the mood for any of James's usual grumbling. "James," she began, her voice firm and authoritative, "I've got your new partner, Detective Alex Harrison." She gestured behind her, and a young man stepped into the room. He was tall and lanky, with sandy blonde hair neatly combed to the side, and a nervous smile that instantly put James on edge. His posture was straight, his suit pressed and clean, too polished, like he hadn't seen enough real action yet. James leaned back further in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, his expression unreadable, but his eyes cold and scrutinizing. "Harrison, huh?" he said slowly, dragging out the words as if testing them on his tongue. "Where you from, kid?" Alex's smile faltered slightly, but he kept his composure, his eyes meeting James's with a mix of apprehension and determination. "Transferred from the 3rd Precinct," he replied, his voice steady, though his hands betrayed a slight tremor. "Worked on narcotics and undercover operations." "Undercover, you say?" James's tone was skeptical, almost mocking. He had seen too many young detectives think they could play hero without understanding the dangers that lurked in the shadows. "Hope you're ready to handle some real work here. We don't play games in organized crime. Alex stiffened slightly, sensing the challenge in James's voice. "I'm here to do my job, Detective Carter," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "And to learn from the best." "Learn from the best, huh?" James snorted, a smirk forming on his lips. "We'll see about that." Captain Stone interjected before the tension could escalate further. "Harrison's been assigned to assist you on the White Vengeance case. You've been on it for a year now, James. Could use a fresh set of eyes." James bristled at her words, his eyes narrowing. The White Vengeance was a dangerous neo-Nazi gang that had been terrorizing the city with drug trafficking, arms dealing, and racially motivated attacks. They were smart, organized, and ruthless, and James had been chasing them down for what felt like forever. And now he was being forced to team up with a rookie? "Fine," James grunted, glaring at Alex, his voice low and filled with warning. "But let's get one thing straight. I don't trust you. You earned that out there in the field. Got it?" Alex nodded, his face serious, though a flicker of something else, maybe doubt or defiance, crossed his eyes. "Understood, Detective Carter." Stone gave them both a hard look. "You two need to figure this out and work together. We're dealing with dangerous people here. No room for ego or division." With that, she left the room, leaving James and Alex standing there in a heavy, uncomfortable silence. James stared at Alex for a moment longer, his mind already racing with thoughts and suspicions. He didn't like the idea of a new partner, especially one he hadn't vetted himself. He had a gut feeling that there was more to this kid than met the eye, and he was determined to find out what. The first few days of their partnership were anything but smooth. James kept Alex at arm's length, giving him the cold shoulder and often refusing to discuss critical aspects of their ongoing investigations. In the car, on stakeouts, or even during briefings, James would give curt responses, leaving Alex to figure things out on his own. When Alex asked about specific details on the White Vengeance case, James would just say, "Stay in your lane, rookie. You don't need to know everything." Alex tried to adapt, his frustration barely hidden behind a forced smile. He tried to make small talk during their long hours in the car, hoping to break the ice. "You been in the organized crime unit long, James?" James didn't even look at him. "Long enough," he replied curtly. "Must have seen a lot, huh?" Alex pressed on, trying to find a common ground. "I mean, I heard about the Rodriguez case. That was impressive work." James shot him a sideways glance, his expression unimpressed. "You do your homework, huh? Let me give you a tip. Knowing old cases won't get you far here. Actions speak louder." Alex nodded, his smile tightening. "Got it." It wasn't just that James didn't trust Alex. He also didn't like the way Alex seemed overly interested in the White Vengeance case. Whenever they were in the field, Alex's questions would always circle back to the gang, their members, their operations, and their connections. It was as if he had a personal vendetta or an ulterior motive. James began to wonder if Alex had some kind of hidden agenda, or if he was trying to use this case to make a name for himself. One evening, after a long day of surveillance and dead-end leads, Alex suggested they grab a drink. James reluctantly agreed, if only to get a read on his new partner. They ended up in a dimly lit bar near the precinct, a place where cops could unwind without too much fuss. The wooden floors creaked under their boots, and the low hum of conversation filled the air. Alex took a swig of his beer, trying to break the ice. "So, Detective Carter. James, right? Why organized crime? What's the story there?" James eyed him over his glass, his face giving nothing away but his eyes sharp and piercing. "Ain't no story, Harrison. Just doing my job. Cleaning up this city one scumbag at a time." Alex chuckled nervously, sensing the underlying tension. "Fair enough. Just trying to understand where you're coming from. I've heard a lot about you." "Is that so?" James replied coolly, his tone almost daring Alex to continue. "What exactly have you heard?" Alex hesitated, realizing he was treading on thin ice. "That you're tough, fair, and that you've been chasing white vengeance for a while now. People say you've got a personal stake in this." James's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "People say a lot of things. The only thing you need to know is that those bastards have hurt too many innocent people, and I'm going to bring them down. You got that?" Alex nodded, sensing the fire in James's voice. "I'm with you on that, James. I want them off the streets as much as you do." For a moment, there was a flicker of understanding between them, a brief moment where their eyes met, and there was a shared acknowledgement of the fight they were both in. But it was short-lived. James's suspicion ran deep, and the next day, it only grew stronger. He caught Alex in a lie. Alex had said he was going to check in with an informant. But when James tracked his movements, he saw Alex heading toward a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. James's instincts kicked in, and he decided to follow, keeping a safe distance. What James saw next confirmed his worst fears. Alex met with a man James recognized as a low-level member of White Vengeance. They exchanged something, a briefcase for a thick envelope. James took photos from a distance, his heart pounding with anger and betrayal. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, making the whole scene feel like a noir movie, except this was all too real. That night, back at the precinct, James stormed into the office, his face contorted with rage. He slammed the door behind him so hard that the glass rattled, and his footsteps echoed off the walls like gunshots. Alex, who was sitting at his desk, looked up in surprise, his face immediately paling at the sight of James's fury. "What the hell were you doing at that warehouse, Harrison?" James demanded, his voice a low growl, filled with barely contained fury. He threw a printed photo on the desk, and it slid across, stopping just in front of Alex. It was a grainy but unmistakable shot of Alex shaking hands with the gang member. Alex's eyes widened, and his mouth opened slightly in shock. "James, I can explain." "Explain what?" James cut him off, his voice rising in volume and intensity. "That you're a goddamn mole. That you're working with these racist scumbags. You think I'm some kind of fool?" His voice was filled with a mix of anger and disappointment. "I knew there was something off about you from the start, Harrison." Alex stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, his face flushing with a mixture of frustration and hurt. "You think I'm working with them? You think I'm a traitor? Just because of one photo?" His voice was shaky, but rising with every word. "It's not just a photo, kid," James shot back, stepping closer, his face mere inches from Alex's. "It's everything, the sneaky questions, the disappearing acts, always sniffing around the White Vengeance case. You keep asking about them, sneaking off on your own. I don't trust you, and now I know why." Alex's voice trembled with both anger and desperation. "You don't trust me because I'm white, James. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You think all white cops are the same? Corrupt bastards who don't care about people like you." His voice cracked with emotion, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and frustration. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, thick and suffocating. For a moment, everything went silent. James's chest heaved with heavy breaths, his fists clenched at his sides. Then, in a flash of anger, he lunged forward, grabbing Alex by the collar, their faces inches apart. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You don't know a damn thing about me, Harrison." They tumbled over desks, throwing punches and wrestling on the floor. Papers flew everywhere, chairs overturned, and the sounds of their struggle echoed through the precinct like a violent storm. Their colleagues rushed in to separate them, pulling them apart as they shouted obscenities at each other. "Enough!" Captain Stone's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She looked at both men with fury in her eyes, her hands on her hips. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and commanding. James, breathing heavily, spat out, "He's in bed with white vengeance, Captain. I saw him with my own eyes. He's been lying to us." Stone turned to Alex, her eyes narrowing. "Harrison, is this true?" Her voice was firm, giving no room for ambiguity. Alex, holding his bleeding lip, shook his head vehemently. "No, ma'am. I'm undercover. I was trying to get intel on their operations, but now they know I'm compromised. They saw James taking those damn pictures." His voice was filled with a mix of desperation and sincerity. Stone's face darkened, her brows furrowing. She was silent for a moment, weighing her options, then spoke with a tone that brooked no argument. "Both of you, in my office, now." Inside Captain Stone's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The blinds were half closed, casting stripes of shadow across the room, cutting through the overhead light and reflecting the fractured state of the precinct. The air was heavy with the smell of coffee and old paper, and the hum of the building's aging air conditioning added a low, droning backdrop to the strained silence. James stood with his arms crossed, his face like stone, while Alex leaned against the wall, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped the blood from his lip. Captain Stone sat behind her desk, her eyes moving slowly between the two detectives. Her usually calm, measured demeanor was replaced with a look of irritation and disappointment. "This precinct doesn't need any more division," she began, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "You two need to work this out, and fast. We're dealing with dangerous people here. There's no room for ego, no room for petty fights. You want to act like a couple of kids in a playground? Do it on your own time." James's face was a mask of cold determination. "I don't see how I can work with someone I can't trust, Captain," he said, his voice low and gruff. Stone sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "James," she said, leaning forward slightly, "Alex has been working undercover for months. His assignment is to infiltrate White Vengeance and take them down from the inside. He's one of the good ones." James's jaw clenched tightly. He didn't want to believe it. "And you didn't think to tell me this?" His voice was tinged with bitterness. "You left me in the dark, Stone. How the hell am I supposed to do my job if I don't know who I'm working with?" Stone's expression softened just a fraction, but her eyes remained sharp. "You know how it works, James. The fewer people who know, the safer it is for everyone involved. But I thought you, of all people, would be able to see the bigger picture." James's eyes flicked to Alex, who was staring back at him with a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. His face still bore the marks of their scuffle, a cut above his eyebrow, a bruise forming on his cheek. Suddenly, it hit James. He had let his own biases cloud his judgment. He had accused Alex not because of hard evidence, but because he had assumed the worst. He had let his anger, his frustration with the system, and his own experiences of betrayal guide his actions. James took a deep breath, the weight of his realization settling heavily on his shoulders. "All right," he said slowly, his voice still tinged with reluctance, but holding a note of sincerity. "I'll give you a chance, Harrison. But you screw up again, and I won't hesitate to take you down myself." Alex, though still clearly shaken, managed a nod. His eyes met James's with a flicker of understanding, and perhaps a bit of hope. "I won't let you down, James," he replied, his voice steadier now, though still marked by the raw edge of recent conflict. Captain Stone, sensing a fragile truce between the two, nodded. "Good," she said firmly. "Now get out of my office and start acting like the damn detectives I know you both can be." As they left Stone's office, the tension between James and Alex was palpable, but there was a new sense of purpose. James was still wary, but he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had judged Alex too harshly. Over the next few weeks, the partnership between James and Alex began to shift, slowly, like tectonic plates grinding against each other, but shifting nonetheless. There were still moments of friction, Still times when James would shoot Alex a suspicious glance, or when Alex would hesitate before speaking, unsure of how his words would be received. But gradually, they started to share more information, ideas, and slowly, trust. James started to see that Alex was not just another rookie looking for a thrill. The kid had grit, determination, and a surprising depth of knowledge about the gang they were after. Alex wasn't just asking questions out of curiosity. He was piecing together a puzzle, connecting dots that James hadn't even considered. One evening, while they were poring over files in James's office, Alex looked up from a stack of papers, his face serious. "James," he said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I think I've got something, a pattern in their drug distribution routes. It's subtle, but it's there. They're using old delivery trucks from defunct companies to move their product. That's why we haven't been able to track them." James leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he processed Alex's words. "Why the hell didn't I see that?" he muttered to himself, a mixture of frustration and grudging admiration creeping into his voice. "Because you were too busy chasing the guys on the street," Alex replied, his tone gentle but firm. "I get it, but we need to think like them, not just react to what they're doing, but anticipate it." For a moment, James stared at him, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, Harrison. Let's see if you're right." Their investigation began to take a new direction. With Alex's insights, they started to identify key players in the gang's operation, not just the muscle on the streets, but the financiers, the middlemen, and the corrupt officials who were helping keep the gang's operations running smoothly. It was like peeling back layers of an onion, each revelation leading them deeper into the rotten core. One night, as they were driving back to the precinct after a long day of surveillance, James glanced over at Alex. "You did good today, kid," he said gruffly, his eyes still fixed on the road. "Don't let it get to your head, though." Alex chuckled, a genuine smile breaking through his usually tense expression. "I won't, James. But thanks. It means a lot coming from you." For a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to lift, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie. But that fragile peace was soon shattered when they received a tip-off that a major drug deal was going down in the next few days. A deal that could cripple White Vengeance's operations if they could catch them in the act. The days leading up to the operation were a blur of planning and preparation. The precinct was buzzing with activity, phones ringing off the hook, maps and surveillance photos pinned to walls, teams being briefed on their roles. The stakes were higher than ever. If they could pull this off, it would be the biggest bust in the history of the organized crime unit. But if they failed, the consequences would be dire. James and Alex worked side by side, mapping out every detail, every possible scenario. Alex would be on the inside, maintaining his cover as a low-level operative, while James would coordinate from outside, directing the backup teams and ensuring the operation went smoothly. The night before the operation, they found themselves alone in the precinct, the rest of the team having gone home to get a few hours of sleep. The tension was thick, both men knowing what was at stake but unwilling to voice their fears. "James," Alex finally said, breaking the silence, his voice almost a whisper, "if things go south tomorrow, if something happens to me, just make sure these bastards don't get away." James looked up from the map he was studying, his expression hard. "Don't talk like that, Harrison. We're getting you out of there alive. No damn way I'm letting you go down." Alex nodded, but there was a weariness in his eyes, a tired acceptance of the risks he was taking. I want you to know, James, I'm not doing this to prove anything to anyone. I'm doing this because I believe in what we're doing, because I want to make things right." James was silent for a moment, his eyes searching Alex's face. "I believe you, kid," he said finally, his voice softer than usual. "Just make sure you keep your head down tomorrow, all right? Yeah, Alex replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. I'll do my best. The next day, the operation kicked off like clockwork. James and Alex were in constant communication, their voices tense over the radio as they coordinated their moves. Alex, deep under cover, blended in with the gang members, his demeanor calm and focused. He made his way to the back of the warehouse where the drugs and money were being exchanged, his heart pounding in his chest. James watched from a distance, his eyes glued to the scene through binoculars. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. His hand hovered over his radio, waiting for the right moment to call in the backup. Then, just as the exchange was about to be completed, something went wrong. One of the gang members, a burly man with a scar running down his face, noticed Alex's unease. His eyes narrowed, and his hand went to his gun. "This cop smells like a rat!" he shouted, his voice booming through the warehouse. The scene erupted into chaos. Gunfire broke out, echoing like thunder in the confined space. James's heart dropped. He immediately called for backup, but he knew they wouldn't make it in time. His instincts screamed at him to act, to move, to save his partner. "Hold your position, James," one of the team leaders shouted over the radio. "Backup is on the way." "To hell with that," James muttered under his breath. He tossed the radio aside, pulled out his weapon, and charged toward the warehouse. He was done waiting. James fought his way through the warehouse, dodging bullets and taking down enemies with the precision of a seasoned cop. The noise was deafening, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. When he reached Alex, he saw that his partner was wounded, blood seeping through his side. He looked pale, but his eyes were sharp, filled with determination. "Hold on, kid," James shouted, pulling him to his feet. "We're getting out of here." Alex gritted his teeth against the pain, nodding as he leaned on James for support. I'm good. Let's move." They moved together, covering each other's backs, firing at the gang members who closed in on them. The gunfire was relentless, but James felt a surge of adrenaline and determination. They were going to make it out of this, no matter what. His mind was focused on one thing only: getting his partner out alive. As they pushed through the chaos, James felt a strange sense of clarity. This was what it meant to be partners, to trust, to fight for each other, to have each other's backs even when the odds were against them. He had judged Alex too quickly, too harshly, and now he was determined to make it right. Finally, they reached the exit, just as police reinforcements arrived. The remaining gang members, seeing they were outnumbered and surrounded, dropped their weapons and surrendered. The sounds of gunfire died down, replaced by the distant wail of sirens and the shouts of officers securing the scene. James and Alex collapsed against the wall outside the warehouse, breathing heavily. The cold night air hit them like a wave, cooling their sweat-drenched faces. James looked at Alex, his eyes filled with a mix of anger, relief, and something new: respect. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you. I should have trusted you." Alex nodded, his breathing still ragged. "It's okay, James," he replied, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "We both have our demons. This job makes us all a little paranoid." James chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're a damn good cop, kid. I should have seen that sooner." They sat in silence for a moment, both realizing how close they had come to losing everything. The operation was a success, the gang was dismantled, and the city was safer because of their work. But more importantly, they had found trust in each other. A trust forged in fire, in blood, and in the heat of battle. A few weeks later, as Alex recovered in the hospital, James visited him regularly. Their conversations were no longer filled with suspicion, but with camaraderie and understanding. They spoke about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. Things they had never shared before. It was as if the barriers that had once separated them had finally been torn down. One afternoon, as James sat by Alex's bedside, he looked out the window. the city stretching out before them. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I've been doing this job a long time, seen a lot of things, but this is different." Alex, his face still bruised but his spirit unbroken, nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think we did something good here, James. Something that matters." James turned to him, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Ready to get back to work, partner?" Alex grinned, despite the pain. "You know it, James. Let's clean up this city." And so, a partnership that began in distrust and conflict was forged in fire, setting the stage for a new chapter in both their lives. One filled with hope, unity, and an unbreakable bond. They knew the road ahead would be tough, filled with challenges and dangers, but they were ready to face it together. Because now they weren't just partners. They were brothers in arms.